we're going to need a lot of it from both of us in order to create the perfect storm, right? We're going to talk about the perfect storm. And maybe I'm going to ruin the story just a bit. We're going to go straight to the end of the story, and then we're going to fill in the story. You and I had a long conversation where we talked about business outcomes. We talked about who should own them. We talked about the mindset shifts, the behavior change, and all of the things that we're about to touch on. And at the end, I asked you, I said, hey, Roxanne, so what would it take, right, for a clismic shift, a tsunami of change to be created? And you said, perfect storm is going to be needed. And I was like, let's create one. So we don't know. We don't know if this episode is going to do it, but we're going to certainly try. And to give the audience a little context, I want to reflect on, you have an incredible background in analytics. So I don't know, what would be the way for you to give an overview of your journey from an analytics lens?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say I've had kind of multiple different career paths. The single common underlying theme, every company I've worked for, every career path I've had is a focus on analytics and measurement. And it wasn't until this whole concept of people analytics became its own unique thing that I really realized that was the common thread that linked every one of my roles in all of the different companies, industries I've worked in together. So I was that math nerd growing up, right? And I always wondered, how am I going to channel my love for like nerdy math stuff into actual outcomes and results. And so I discovered the field of industrial organizational psychology in undergrad. And I thought, well, this is the perfect storm for myself in terms of focus on human behavior, but also a really important aspect of measurement of that behavior. And psychometrics, which is kind of our official term for analytics in the IO psychology space. So for me, it was really around, how do I find kind of that topic or area where I can use all of the skills, the things that I really like to do. It's the perfect combination. What do I like to do? What am I good at? And what exists, right? And I was able to find that in this field of IO psychology, but I was also able to use the skills that I learned in grad school to transfer them to other topics. So I did I was a research scientist at United Health Group, looking at treatment paths, right? Looking at the nurse line, so the 24-hour nurse line that you call. I was doing the research behind the scenes to say, is this adding an ROI to our customers, right? I've done research in stores, looking at store employees in retail environments, saying, how do we engage our employees and how can we prove the value from a business hard dollar outcome of doing that kind of stuff? I've done similar type of works in manufacturing companies. How do we engage employees who are working 10 to 12 hour shifts a day, literally chopping up animal parts for human consumption, right? So like a very different type of mindset. So it has all kind of come around full filter to me being in my role now, which is focused more primarily on people analytics. And that's something I've focused on in the last kind of 5 to 6 years with a little intersperse in between. But it's really been a matter of like finding those opportunities where I can use all of these skills together. Really, and it's what we're going to talk about today, is create that perfect storm of how do we channel human behavior? How do we measure and assess human behavior to really drive business outcomes? And I think that's the kind of the North Star of a people team or an HR team, right? It's like, how are we really channeling the power of our employees to make a difference at work? It's really about driving the bottom line.
Yeah, the connection between business outcomes, bottom line, and unlocking the human potential. We'll talk quite a bit about the consumerization of the employee experience. You and I began to talk about it, reorienting everything that they experience with them in mind. You didn't mention that you received a PhD. I mean, you went pretty deep.
I did, yeah. So that was actually kind of a last minute decision. I was towards the end of my undergrad and I thought, well, what am I going to do next? And my plan was actually to stay at the University of Calgary, where I was, and get a statistics degree. So follow up with my psychology and business degree with a statistics degree. Then I mentioned before, I discovered this industrial organizational psychology class, and I thought, oh my goodness, this is actually the mix of what I've been looking for. So I started to work with some professors, discovered this whole concept of grad school and research and PhDs, and ended up somewhat fortuitously ending up down here in the States, going to grad school. Ended up at the University of Minnesota, which I'm proud to say is one of the strongest programs out there. work with Professor Paul Sackett, who actually, he and his wife have their second home here in Austin, Texas. So I hang out with them all the time, which is really great. And so dug really deep. And I think that it's one of those fields that it's more common now, but when I was kind of growing up and going through undergrad, I didn't really know that this was even a real thing. And I think a lot of companies, especially smaller companies now, don't realize that this concept of industrial organizational psychology is a real thing. And for me, it's been a really great foundation for people analytics, right? And measurement, because you think about what is people analytics? It's looking at your talent. It's looking at the different moments in the talent life cycle, like we said before, to help businesses make better decisions. Well, who is better equipped to really deep dive into the talent life cycle than someone who has in-depth education and research background around employee behavior at work? So for me, it's just kind of the perfect mix in terms of helping organizations really think differently around what is our talent strategy and how do we form our talent strategy and how do we create a measurement plan that allows us to really impact the business in a very different way.
Totally. And I know as the audience is listening in, and occasionally when they come across an academic, they go, I'm going to learn about my amygdala. This is going to be a neuroscience lesson. And you all, before you jump off the line, I suggest you keep listening because this is a very pragmatic conversation. This is going to be a business outcome-driven conversation, and all of the knowledge that Roxanne is about to bring to create the perfect storm is going to be very practical-oriented. So you do not need a PhD to listen. I certainly do not have a PhD, and I find it to be super engaging. So, business outcomes, right? There's so many. So many. Even when I raise this question, I get all kinds of responses. But you and I said, let's pick one and frame it. What do you think?
So, thinking about this, it's really great when you're in an organization where these tangible dollar-based business outcomes are really easy to measure. And I'll use a former employer of mine, Best Buy, right? Every store has a certain set of metrics that you can measure, and they're typically measured in dollar outcomes. Now, a tech company might not have that, right? When you think about a people team or an HR team, how do we measure a business outcome in that? It's a lot more challenging. So I think one that's kind of universal and is really important, any type of industry, any type of company is turnover or retention, right? There's been a lot of research around what is the cost of turnover, what is the value of retaining employees, especially critical talent and top talent. So I think retention is a nice one because it's pretty universally consistent and can be measured across any organization of any size in any industry.
I also love it because it's so painful to understand all of the implications of it. And retention continues to come up in almost every discussion I'm having. And I say still because I wonder, is it going to change with the economy? What's happening? Microsoft just laid off, 10,000 people. There's thousands of folks losing their jobs. But I'm glad and encouraged to continue to hear retention is important. In fact, after layoffs, maybe it'll be even more important because now it's the high performers that are going to scratch their heads. It's them that are going to start to think about a second job, or are they going to do gigs, or are they going to look for another organization? So we're going to start with the first most difficult question, right? Retention. And again, our eyes on creating the perfect storm. We hope at the end of this episode, someone listened in is about to call a bunch of folks together and they're going to create change. So the first question is who owns retention, right? We can have the easy answer, everybody, and then no one is accountable. But how do you think about the question of who owns it?
Yeah. So, being in the HR space for most of my career, although I usually don't tell people that. I say I'm in analytics. It's a little more general. But kind of being in the HR space, I think that a lot of talent programs and outcomes tend to fall on the shoulders of HR people. And I actually think that's the wrong approach for a lot of these. So when I think about who owns retention, it's actually business leaders and any leader, right? You as a leader or a manager of a team, you own a number of things. You own the culture and environment that you choose to create for your employees. You own employee engagement, whether or not your employees are engaged with their job. You own, to some extent, the extent to which employees are going to stay at their job, right? So this whole concept of a retention. So I think it's really the individual manager, and I think, if you take it up a level, let's think a little more kind of high level around, it's the leaders of the businesses, right? It's the head of marketing who really fundamentally owns the turnover for that department. It's the head of engineering. It's the head of HR who owns turnover for the HR team, right? I think HR's job as a whole is to really help develop the programs and strategies around keeping people, developing people, engaging people. How do we measure those things? But it really goes to the leaders of the businesses and the leaders of teams to actually take the action. So the ownership should absolutely land on those who are directly impacting the people that we're talking about, which are the employees on the floor.
I was back to back today, and right before this conversation, I spoke with one of the largest financial service investment advisory firms in the United States, and I spoke to someone who's leading up their employee experience. And I asked the same question, and the person said, the next conversation I'm going to have is with our COO. And I was like, yes, that is exact point of view that we're formulating through these discussions in the Future People initiatives, is that if it's going to live on the sidelines, nice to have, it's over there, right? Let us do our work. Let us deliver. Here, you go play with all these other things on the side. You're taking it straight into lines of business. So then that leads us to the question of who are the enablers to be able to support the COO or other lines of business in order for them to be able to do this work?
So I think there's multiple levels. So I think about some of the roles I've had on people analytics teams. So my team would be part of the enabler in terms of providing data and insights in a business, right? So a leader's out in a business. They don't just, open up a spreadsheet and there's their turnover. Somebody has to enable that. Somebody has to build the dashboards, whatever it might be, whatever that mechanism is. Somebody has to build the mechanism for enabling self-service and on-demand access to this type of information, segmented by business, team, et cetera, whatever makes sense. So I think part of the enablers are really around the people team or wherever that might sit in terms of providing access to data so leaders can track the numbers to even know what are the changes, where's my turnover, is it good or bad? And this is actually another conversation. We could probably talk about this. Is it good or bad? That's a totally different conversation. Is it voluntary turnover? Is it involuntary turnover? What's the difference between those? What are the gaps?
High performers, not high performers.
Regrettable turnover, not regrettable turnover. And then when you say high performers, you start to think about, a lot of companies who are doing talent reviews, the traditional kind of 9-box, the high potential, high performer.
Yep.
Does it matter as much? This is more of a philosophical question. Does it matter as much if people who are kind of middle to average performers but aren't necessarily going to be the next business or unit leaders? Does it matter as much if they're leaving? The answer is it probably depends on the business, right? So think about retail. Retail has a really high turnover typically. I think those types of organizations are much more prepared to handle the typical associate turnover. But when you take it up a level to the general manager of a store, those positions are a lot more challenging to fill, right? So that might be a little different of a conversation because the general manager, probably the mindset is, okay, well, are they maybe ready to be a regional manager? The people who are kind of in that succession plan, you actually don't want them to leave, right? The person who comes into the store and is highly disengaged and probably creates a disengaging environment for the customers who come in, you might actually want to think about how do we actively turn some of those people over.
Accelerate their transition.
Absolutely. So it's not just, one single unit of measurement, turnover. There's multiple ways to slice it and dice it. And you also have to think about seasonality. Retail, let's pick on retail again. Clearly there's seasonality in terms of when you're hiring people, when are people more likely to leave. I've worked in multiple organizations, corporations, different industries, where people are more likely to leave after the yearly bonus payout, after your stocks vest, etc. So we came to expect certain bumps. So how do we be proactive, knowing that those bumps might be coming, like you mentioned, with our critical talent, our top performers? What do we do differently to really focus on identifying critical talent, potential leaders of the company at the next level, and taking actions to make sure they stay engaged, right? And so that is where some of this enablement piece comes in, is I think the people team, and lots of different owners within the people team, depending on the operating model. The people team, I think, is really responsible for helping to identify what are some of those patterns, what are some of the blips that we need to be aware of, and where does our talent fit in terms of any talent assessment, right?
Totally. One way I've heard it talk about is identify the opportunities in the data. But that's one of the enablers. Let's talk about some other enablers. I'm going to give you some guesses, and I'd love for you to react to them. I think it's table stakes to have a CTO or a technology function represented, because even when we talk about data, what kind of data? You may have 1 to 3 sources of data, but there may be 5 through 20 sources of data. That will be a bigger lift. But now that it's business outcomes oriented conversation that will be activated by the operational leadership, it's worth the lift, because the insights are going to be insane.
And I think what you bring up there, and I fully agree that the CTO is the importance of the partnership and integration of leaders across different businesses to enable this, right? It's not any one single leader. It's the partnership between, let's say, the people analytics team and the technology team, whoever might own that, to ensure that you have the mechanisms, again, and the technology in place where you can track this. A lot of companies use ONA, Organizational Network Analysis, which is looking at calendaring data, interactive activities on chats, right? You absolutely need a strong partnership with the technology team to really enable that and get that up and running. So I think these kind of integration points across the businesses are key enablers. And there's so many different combinations of those that might be important, right? And so even within the people team, your learning and development group has a key stake in retention of high talent. Are you giving them the development opportunities, right? Is somebody super, super talented, super high potential, and they don't see a future there because they're not learning or growing, right? Why aren't we giving them the opportunities? The total rewards team, are we offering competitive benefits and pay and compensation? And maybe we don't have the highest compensation, but what are the other value add benefits? Unlimited PTO. I've worked for a few companies now where PTO is unlimited. That's a game changer for some people, right? And I'm not one of those people that has a problem taking it, by the way, either. Hence my 2 weeks PTO at the end of January here, right? So there's all these different factors. And I think like a really important one too is even the CEO or the president of the company, how do they talk about the importance of these things? If these are conversations that are happening at that level, it trickles down. And so I think when you're even lacking having that commentary at that level, that could be what's the opposite of enabler? A disabler, right? Because if people don't see, if people don't see the importance of it at the top level, it's going to be really hard to have that kind of trickle down effect and have everybody else rally around the importance of this type of thing.
Totally. So here's what we've got at the table so far. We've got the folks that are in the people analytics space. We've got the total rewards. And let's even say we've got the CHRO and the entire, most important pillars represented in some shape, or one person, multiple people. We've got the technology, CTO, CIO. Maybe you mentioned the CEO, president, potentially. There's another function that recently has been added and is just for me fun to hear. I know I shared with you that I founded an agency in Chicago about 11 years ago, digital marketing agency, and then my work really shifted inside organization when I co-founded ProHabits to deliver nudges. But marketing in this context has been added when we talk about consumerizing the employee experience, because literally we ask who in the organization knows the most about consumerization of an experience. And you go, wait, not everyone has a marketing team or an event. There are certain industries where marketing is not a major function. But how do you think about having the marketing, whether it's a CMO or some other function, represented?
Yeah, so I think it's also really important. And I think this is part of the mindset shift that we've been talking about, because I don't think it's something people typically think of it when they're thinking, how do we really get a handle on the measurement of retention and figuring out where it's important, where it's not important, where to focus? People aren't thinking, I better bring in my marketing team, right? I think it's kind of skipped over. But when you think about marketing and you take a step back, we're talking about employer brand. So I think we talked about this in one of our previous conversations. When I think about what does talent mean, it is the first point of contact a potential candidate has with a website, marketing team, right? All that can permeate the experience they have all the way through to the point where they're an alumni, right? So the concept of employer brand, how are you presenting yourself? How are you marketing, literally, the company and the value and the benefits and all of that? I think that underlies the entire talent life cycle. So I think there's untapped opportunities there, but I absolutely think it's a critical element, and I think organizations need to start thinking very differently when we're thinking about our talent, from talent acquisition to retention to exits, right? I like to think about every person who used to work in this company is still a potential employee, is a potential customer if you're in a retail organization, right? So how do we make sure that they're having such a great experience even when they do leave, that they're still really identifying with the brand of the company?
Love that. So we brought him in. I think it's in Ocean's 11. There's a scene. Do we need one more? We need one more. Let's get one more. So we just got one more. There it is. We've got the full team. And there are probably endless conversation we could have about the different variations of titles. If there's a chief talent officer, I just interviewed one. Yes, absolutely. Is there a chief employee experience? Or maybe it's in the healthcare industry, chief medical officer, who is not their, that's their form of operations. So absolutely, we're not dismissing, but moving on. So they are in the room together, and they've got a big whiteboard. I'm a big fan of whiteboards. And they just wrote the words retention, right? They wrote the words retention. So retention is a business outcome on one side. And all the way on the other side, we're saying consumerization of the employee experience, right? How do we think about consumerization? Reorientation. It's all about them. Amazon talks about customer obsession. You push a button, everything happens. You want to return something, I don't even know how they do it. You push a button and it's done. Like I just have to, do the thing, go inside and it's done. Show them the phone. Unbelievable. So how do we become obsessed about the user, in this case, of being the employee? Where do we begin? And you and I talked about systems, platforms. We think an entire ecosystem is about to be born. But in broader strokes, I think about step one. You're in analytics, it's about the data we receive. You mentioned O&A, right? Is it about getting more data so that the insights could be considerably deeper? But I'd love for you, they've got the word retention on the wall. What are the next words they start to write down?
Well, I'm even going to take a step back for a second, because I think we're making an assumption, and we can have that assumption as table stakes, that everybody's fully committed to this, right? So before I even get the people in the room, I'm hoping the conversation is had that everybody's committed to putting time, value, and investment in this.
Roxanne, my whole life people just tell me I jump over things. You nailed it. That's a huge assumption that I just made, but there's no point in having the session if there isn't the alignment about the tension between outcomes and the consumer experience, consumerization of the employee experience. You're 100% right.
I was, oh my goodness, when was it? Year and a half ago, the Great Resignation took the world by storm. I don't know. I think I ruffled some feathers once. I called it fake news once, and some people disagreed with me. But then Harvard Business Review came out with an article that basically said retention patterns in the United States have actually been following the exact expected pattern. And there was a blip in 2020 or 2021 with the pandemic. And then turnover seemed to artificially rise. But if you look at the graph, it was going in the exact same direction that you would have expected anyway. I'll dig it up and I'll send it off to you. But I think that's part of it's still in leaders' minds. Microsoft came up with a study or something. I read about it in Quartz, said something like maybe we can expect up to 40% turnover. So I think just some of the conversation and the narrative that was happening kind of in the social world really started to get people to think differently about that. So I think for our example, our use case, that actually works in our favor, because I think you say the Great Resignation, quiet quitting, whatever, we're quiet hiring, whatever we're calling it now. I think those actually have helped us and enabled us to get these people in the room to start to think about it, right? And start to think about why it's important. So I think that's working in our favor. I think the second thing is you really have to have leaders who understand the importance of the employee experience in all of this, because some leaders don't, right? And I like to have an assumption that kind of business unit leaders understand that the quality of experience that your employees have actually directly impacts the quality of the work that they produce, the quality of the experience that your customers have, etc. Not everybody sees that. So I propose we make an assumption that everybody is kind of on board with all of that, because that's a whole,
Totally agreed. How about we make the assumption that everyone in the room is going to answer the following question with a yes, unanimously. The question is, do you care about your employees as much as you care about your customers? They just answered yes, and we go, okay. If someone answers no, we say either meeting is over, or the person who said no, open up the computer, get to work, because the rest of it is not going to be beneficial for you.
Love it. Okay, so we're all on the same page, except that one person, but we kicked them out. We have the word retention on the board. So I think you were starting to talk about data kind of as another first step. So absolutely. So I think there needs to be some sort of presentation of data, historical data, trending data, segmented data to really look and see, well, what are the patterns that we're looking at? And you also have to kind of, maybe finance should be in the room too. Workforce planning, right? Is like, let's say we have 15% turnover. Again, is that good or bad? We don't know. What are our growth plans? Do we need to grow the business? Do we know that maybe we have an underperformance issue? So we need to start managing people out. And that means we need to maybe backfill even higher, or it means we need to focus more on retention of high potential and critical talent. So I think you need to have a lot of that data with you ahead of time. What's the workforce plan? We talked about voluntary, involuntary, regrettable, non-regrettable, kind of what are some of the expectations and patterns that we've seen historically. Can we kind of use those to guesstimate what's going to happen in the future to help come up with our kind of plan of where we need to focus? What other data points do we need? So there's survey data, intention to stay. Most experience or engagement surveys, one of the typical items is that I intend to stay with Probe Habits for the next 12 months or something like that, right? The best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. There's a theory called the theory of planned behavior I learned about in grad school. The best predictor of an actual behavior is the intention to engage in that behavior. So very likely most companies have some of that data available already. So it's not only looking at kind of patterns in turnover and segmenting that in different ways, but it's also looking at what does it look like in terms of employees saying they're likely to leave? You know, how many people in our key business unit, let's say it's software engineers, how many people in the software engineering team are reporting that they're disagreeing with I intend to stay with the company, right? Okay, well, that's like another issue. So maybe we need to focus really on that group. How many people who are diverse talent, right? That's a hot topic. That's a whole other webinar or podcast we could talk about is retention of critical diverse talent, right? I find it hard to believe I hope any leader is going to say, well, that's not important to me, right? But sometimes you actually have to show the data and show things like the intention to leave, the differential experience of inclusion and diversity at a company to get leaders to think very differently about how important that kind of talent piece is, right? So we got to get all this data together, probably go back and gather some more data and bring it, because once you start to share data, people will just have more questions, which is a good thing. Creates more work, but it's often a good thing when you get the wheels turning. So we're here, we've got all this data together, we've dug into everything we can. Maybe we've even come up with a plan to say, and here's what we want to measure next. So step 2 after this conversation is, okay, what are the next things that we actually want to start to measure to help enable this turnover conversation that we're having?
Totally with you. I was just taking in the intention is the best predictor of action. I was just taking that in for a second. It got me thinking. With nudges, we've delivered millions of nudges, and one of our nudges, do you commit to doing something? And if people commit it, do you want to take a guess what percentage finish the action if they commit it? 70%. Yeah, so you're so right. That's spot on. Okay, so step 1, data coming in, right? We can expand the data that's coming in because, hey, we've got the CTO, and by the way, we paused the meeting, we got the CFO to come in. So we got the CFO and we're like, yo, CFO, there's the CTO, hey, we need more data. What kind of data do we need? Let's be marketers. You ask a marketer today, what do you do? We're data driven. It's all about data. It's all about understand. Data really isn't, it's not about data. It's about understanding the human experience. Customer, employee, doesn't matter. The only way you understand the human experience is through the data. So you can meet them where they are, the right message, right time, all that. The second is you nailed it, insights and analytics that are now converging past trends, looking at future, thinking about gaps, skill gaps, retention, normal, not all of these aspects. The next step that I think we ought to be thinking of, and this is super biased now, is actionability. Because actionability is now at scale creating change. What have I seen not work or not be sustainable? Meetings, moments. Moments are amazing, whether it's Simon Sinek, Marshall Goldsmith, whether it's your own CEO that's coming in, that is really inspiring. And for half hour, you can't sit in your chair. You're like, oh my goodness, my life has changed, until the phone goes on at the end of the meeting. And then next morning, what meeting? There was something we talked about that I liked. Right? So in my view, we need to start thinking about, how do we bite size? How do we make our messages relevant? How do we find them where they're doing their work, whether it's Microsoft Teams or Slack? So Roxanne, take me into actionability, perfect world. What
are you seeing in it?
Yeah, so I want to have a conversation around, how do we determine what the actions are? I think that's part of what you're getting at. And this is, I forget what it's called. This is the old school. It's a chart you've seen where one dimension is like easy to do, hard to do. And the other dimension is like, we can do it right now versus it's going to take a long time to do, right? So it's like the difficulty, like availability. So I think it's really around the kind of standard, like the brainstorm of what are some of the actions we're currently taking? Are they working? Yes or no? And then we put them in this little chart. The things are, it's impact and difficulty. That's what it is. High impact, low impact, easy to do, hard to do. Okay, the easy to do things, high impact and low impact, hopefully we're already doing some of those, but let's get those ones out of the way immediately. And so maybe an easy impact thing is like, do a survey to assess intentions to leave and perceptions of the employee experience. That's a pretty easy one to do and can potentially have a really high value impact depending on what you see and how you frame it. But the harder things to do, right, is like create a high performance leadership program for critical and top talent, right? Because that involves a lot of time and money, etc. But you put everything in this chart, everything that you've come up with, to kind of help you prioritize and pace and sequence. What is the order with which we need to do things? And you can even lay on top of that. So now we have a 3-dimensional chart. It's getting more complicated, but really in terms of like, what is more critical that we do? So let's say that you have a challenge with females in leadership positions at level X and above are exiting at 2 times the rate of other people. Made that totally up. Okay, what are we going to do immediately to start to kind of deep dive into that critical talent segment, which is female leaders, and how are we going to retain them differently? So like that might be one where it maybe is harder to do, but you're going to prioritize it more quickly because it's actually more important to you, or any kind of talent group that you might think about, right? So I think you kind of have this 3-dimensional chart that you're looking at. It's easy to do, it's hard to do, high value impact, low value impact. And then you're like, okay, what is the critical nature of whether or not we do this, right? And so I think you kind of come up with that model to help you kind of create the quick wins, the low-hanging fruit, to use that silly phrase, right? Versus the really important, but it's going to take a little bit longer. And then you're going to have to leave this room and go and kind of rally up people in the organization to form different project teams to connect, but really make it happen. So I think there's kind of like a multiple step approach, but that's going to be a really important part in terms of prioritizing what we do next.
Mm-hmm. I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm imagining myself in that room. I'm imagining going through the exercise, and throughout the exercise, you keep looking at the first word on the board: retention. Which ones here could have the biggest impact on retention? One thing I was meant to just take a quick pause here on your Best Buy experience. There's something you said that has resonated, I think 2 months ago we first met, and since then you talked about the kind of when two journeys come together, the customer and the employee, into a single moment, and you described it really well, like at a Best Buy. Where you see, hey, a customer is walking in, there's an interaction with a representative of the Best Buy, and they have come together into a perfect moment. And in that moment, is where you see if the journeys that you've architected as the brand are on point on all sides. And it's not going to work every time, but this is where it matters most, because that's the experience.
Absolutely. So I think if I recall correctly, so when I worked at Best Buy, and I was responsible for employee experience measurement, but I worked really closely with the customer experience team, which was amazing because number one, I learned a ton, and it gave me a completely different mindset and how to think about this. And this is why I use retail organizations a lot, because you have that beautiful, perfect marriage of the employee and the customer, where you can actually prove through linkage analysis that the employee impacts the customer experience. But I used to go into stores and districts and meet with managers, and I would share this story and say, I come into a Best Buy and I have a really good experience, and I, have a great salesperson. I buy my thing and I leave, and like, that's great. But if I come in and I have a terrible experience, everybody I know is going to hear about it. It's going to go on Twitter. I'm going to shoot that out on Facebook or whatever it might be. I'm going to call my mom and complain. I'm going to tell my friends not to go there anymore. So that critical moment, right, is so critical. And part of the outcome of that, not only we have the data, and I'm sure a lot of retail organizations have this, where you can prove the impact of the employee on the customer, but we also said to like store managers, take a real serious and hard look at your employees. And let's think about who is really highly engaged and who is just obviously really disengaged. And let's just have a conversation with them. Like, what's going on? Do you need to manage these people out? Is there something so small that's missing? Is the manager the problem, right? Because I think that's a big part. We were talking about getting all our data together earlier, and I talked a lot about segmenting. It can often be a problem manager, right? And there's a pretty big disconnect I found between how a senior leader might think of a manager and how the employees might think of a manager, right? Because there's a couple ways you can get things done. You can get things done by engaging and motivating and encourage people to go out there and get their work done. Or you can say, go get your work done, and if you don't do it, I'm going to fire you, or you're not going to get a break, or you're not going to get bonuses, right? It's like, which one is more likely to yield long-term success? And I think we know the answer to that. So that the concept of the importance of the manager, I don't want to forget about that and not bring that up, because I think it's critically important, not only in a retail organization, but any organization.
Yeah, so let's go back to the board, right? One of the folks just got up, and it probably is the analytics leader, and put the word manager on the board, even though I'm not a big fan of the word manager, leader, however they refer to the people leaders in their organization. And we have had Gallup on, and I think their book or their title or their tagline, something, it's all about the manager, stupid. It's like, yes, it's all about 70% plus of the employee experience is about the manager. Okay, so the reason I brought up Best Buy and convergence of those two experiences is because as we're in that room thinking about the squadron of all the possible activities that we could create, I think the lens that we need to ensure we have is what's the impact, perhaps not just on retention. Do we go back to the board and say net promoter scores, or straight up let's talk revenue and let's put that right next to it?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say they're all related. They're not unique, right? There's one big Venn diagram, and they're all related. The extent to which they're related varies by organization, right? And the extent to which they're related is also going to be moderated by how engaged employees feel, right? So we talk about NPS. Obviously, that's like a proxy for engagement score, right? Same difference, basically. It's really around, it's a leading indicator of whether or not an employee will stay, right? And sometimes there's just one thing that's keeping them there, and that could be the manager, it could be something else, right? So I think they're all intertwined, and they're all predictive. And there's tons of studies, and it's funny you mentioned Gallup, because we worked with Gallup at Best Buy for years and did some really cool studies. And Gallup in, 2002, published in Journal of Applied Psychology, I think it was, the biggest meta-analysis looking at employee satisfaction or employee engagement linked to business outcomes. And, Best Buy was part of that data, right? And I think it's still one of the biggest studies out there that proves the link. And if I get the number right, it might not quite be right, but it was something like a 1 point increase in an engagement score was like an extra $20,000 in revenue per month or something like that. But that's kind of the general gist of it. So something that we missed in some of the data gathering also, which is actually important, is like, what does the research say? And I just did a little mini spiel for a people analytics platform company and just got posted on LinkedIn. And I talked about the importance of thinking about the research, right? We don't have to go into any of these conversations blind. And a really good analytics team or marketing team or whatever team is going to come with their receipts, right? So I mentioned the theory of planned behavior. Intention to perform a behavior is one of the biggest predictors of whether or not somebody will engage in a behavior. So those are really big things that have been researched for decades, right? And there's lots of new research coming out all the time. So I think kind of coming in arms with some of that information to help maybe guide you a little bit is a really important piece as well.
I totally agree. I mean, I'm looking at time with like, oh no, has it really been, almost 45 minutes? And when you said in the beginning, you go, time flies. When you and I just start, we could do this for hours, and maybe one day we should. We should just go on for a couple hours and do a long form. Oh my goodness, we could really get creative then. So what I'm thinking is, let's help them wrap up the conversation. So what did they do? They wrote down retention, they wrote down managers, they had a squadron where they mapped out the possible initiatives. They even considered other business outcomes that are going to be influenced by retention. And they really talked about additional data they're going to pour in, the insights. They looked at past and future. They may have even discussed the possibility of making it actionable. I have to do my plug. It's about reminders and nudges. Like I keep hearing over and over from people, like, "Hey, and the intentions are right, but remind me, help me, stay in front of me." But let's help them end the meeting. Let's think about what advice could we give them. How do they, So I think it's the COO or the leaders of the LBOs that are going to be in charge of the launches with enablers that are in the group. What takeaway, what advice would you give them
to give them the best chance of success?
Yeah. So something you mentioned at the outset of our conversation is you have a meeting, you put it in the desk drawer and you walk out because there's no accountability. So even though everybody in that room has a role, I think there does have to be a holder of the accountability and agreement and commitment in that room to accountability. So I actually think before even leaving that room, the next series of meetings check-ins are set up, right? For the next X amount of time. I think based on the chart, the immediate next steps have already been assigned. Those like lower high impact things that aren't challenging to do, those have already been assigned. And at the next meeting, we have a check-in on progress, right? So I think kind of putting pen to paper to actually starting to create that accountability is going to be one of the real key pieces, and saying, here's what the expectations are in the next meeting. So I think it's not rocket science. It's pretty straightforward. Again, people are busy. You leave that room, you're off to the next meeting, completely different topic. Retention might be the last thing on your mind, right? So it's like, okay, how do we actually make sure that we're committing to this? And I think part of that conversation hopefully has happened beforehand, but I think you actually have to make that a real commitment to accountability in that room before people even leave. And there has to be that holder of that space. And I'm not sure who that person could be. It could be multiple people. But somebody kind of has to have that responsibility. So maybe you've got a project manager in there or whoever it might be to really kind of be the gatekeeper and holder, even though they might not own anything necessarily, but somebody to just make sure that you're staying on track and you're having your check-ins, etc.
I think it should be the internal champion of change. It's the audience that's listening in, because they're all over the board in the functions. They're in L&D, change management, they're in employee experience, HR. Just spoke to a technology leader. Actually, I'm blown away by some of the CTOs I'm talking to, where I would expect it to be a lot of pushback on certain things, and they're welcoming it because they're experiencing the impact of retention, right? I mean, whenever if it's not in front of you, right, it's not the same. When you talk to them about sales, of course they want to support it, but they'll feel it differently. Retention, wow, we can't deliver. We can't deliver what we have. So I think we're okay to unlock the door. I think that now we've got the change agent that's there who is talking about here's what's next. We've got an action plan. We've got a roadmap. We've got the commitment from everyone. We're going to solve retention while looking at the impact across the other KPIs in the business. And the perfect storm has begun. There we go. Well, listen, I hate to hang up, but I think we're at time, Roxanne. This has been fantastic. I appreciate it. I hope you come back again and we keep chiseling at this future of people initiatives together.
I would love to. Thank you so much. Absolutely my pleasure.
All right, over and out.